The last stop. The train screeched to a halt, its mournful wail echoing through the desolate night. Outside, the world was a canvas of inky blackness, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of distant lightning. Inside, the carriage was a tomb of silence, broken only by the rhythmic thudding of my own heart. I was the last passenger, a solitary figure adrift in a metal cocoon hurtling through the void. A business trip had stretched into a nightmarish odyssey, and now, as the final destination loomed, a sense of dread gnawed at my insides. The train station was a phantom, a mere outline against the impenetrable darkness. As I stepped onto the platform, a cold wind whipped around me, carrying with it the scent of decay and something indefinably sinister. The station was deserted, save for a solitary figure standing in the shadows. A woman, cloaked in darkness, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. A shiver ran down my spine as she turned to face me. Her eyes, twin pools of black, seemed to pierce through the veil of night, directly into my soul. Without a word, she gestured towards the inky blackness beyond the station. There was no choice. The train was gone, vanished like a specter into the night. I followed the woman, her silent form a beacon in the encroaching darkness. We walked for what felt like hours, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. Then, it appeared, a colossal, iron behemoth, its silhouette etched against the starless sky. It was a train, but unlike any I had ever seen. Its carriages were shrouded in an eerie, otherworldly glow, and an oppressive silence hung heavy in the air. The woman boarded first, disappearing into the spectral train. With a deep breath, I followed. The interior was a labyrinth of shadows, the only light emanating from a series of flickering oil lamps. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, a metallic tang that made me gag. As I wandered through the carriages, I encountered other passengers. They were pale, gaunt figures, their eyes vacant and lifeless. They moved like automatons, their footsteps echoing through the hollow corridors. A sudden, blood-curdling scream shattered the eerie silence. It echoed through the train, a chilling symphony of terror. I raced towards the source of the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. I found myself in a carriage unlike the others. It was filled with grotesque machinery, wires, and strange, pulsating orbs. At the center of the room, strapped to a metal table, was a man. His skin was pale and translucent, his eyes wide with terror. And attached to him, a myriad of tubes and wires, was draining the life from him. The woman in the hat stood over him, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. She turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You're next," she hissed, her voice a chilling whisper. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me. The machinery roared to life, and I felt a cold, metallic hand gripping my arm. As darkness enveloped me, I realized with a sickening clarity that this train was not merely a mode of transport. It was a tomb, a hellish machine designed to harvest the life force of its passengers. And I was its next victim. The last thing I saw was the woman's sinister smile as the machine began its work. The train screamed into motion, its mournful wail echoing through the night, carrying with it the secrets of a horror that would never see the light of day. The world faded to black. A cold, clinical sensation replaced the terror. I felt a surge of energy, an unnatural vitality coursing through my veins. Then, silence. A void. When consciousness returned, I was no longer in the hellish carriage. The world was bathed in a sickly green glow. I was standing in a vast, underground chamber. Rows upon rows of identical metal beds lined the walls, each occupied by a pale, lifeless body. The woman in the hat stood at the far end of the chamber, her silhouette outlined by the eerie green light. She turned, her eyes glinting with a macabre satisfaction. "Welcome," she said, her voice a chilling whisper, "to the harvest." Horror seized me as I realized the truth. This place was a factory of life, a monstrous machine that harvested souls. The train, a sinister reaper, gathered its victims, and here, in this subterranean hell, they were transformed into something other. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had become one of them. Desperation fueled my escape attempt. I stumbled towards the chamber's exit, my body heavy with the weight of my newfound horror. The woman didn't move, her gaze fixed on me with a cruel indifference. As I reached the door, it slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The chamber was plunged into darkness, the only sound the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. Then, a noise. A faint scratching sound, growing louder with each passing moment. Something was approaching. Terror consumed me as the darkness was pierced by two glowing red eyes. A monstrous creature emerged from the shadows, its form grotesque and inhuman. It was a being born from the harvested souls, a twisted amalgamation of human and machine. The creature lunged, its razor-sharp claws aimed at my throat. I raised my arms to defend myself, but it was futile. In that final moment, as the creature's claws closed in, I felt a strange sense of peace. The horror, the pain, it was all fading away. And then, darkness. The train roared through the night, its cargo of terror hidden deep within its steel belly. The woman in the hat stood by a porthole, watching the world slip past. A satisfied smile played on her lips as she contemplated the next harvest. For the train was eternal, and its hunger, insatiable.
The train screeched through the night, a monstrous beast clawing its way through the inky blackness. Outside, the world was a blur of shadows, punctuated by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the desolate, rain-soaked landscape. Inside, the carriage was a tomb of silence, broken only by the rhythmic clickety-clack of the wheels and the low hum of the engine. Sarah huddled in her seat, a thin blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The train was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a chance to escape the city and reconnect with her boyfriend, David. But now, as the storm raged outside, the train seemed to be a vessel of dread, carrying them deeper into an abyss of fear. The lights flickered and died, plunging the carriage into complete darkness. A cold draft swept through the car, chilling her to the bone. Sarah reached out for David's hand, but he was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. She tried to shake him awake, but her voice was a mere whisper in the deafening silence. A creaking sound echoed through the carriage, followed by a low, guttural moan. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she strained her ears, trying to identify the source of the noise. It was coming from the back of the train, growing louder with each passing moment. Fear gripped her as she imagined dark, shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their eyes glowing like embers. She wanted to scream, but the sound was frozen in her throat. The train lurched violently, throwing her against the window. A flash of lightning illuminated the tracks, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw a figure standing beside the train. It was tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and a face that was a grotesque mask of shadows. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the image was burned into Sarah's mind. She felt a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead as she realized she was alone. David was gone. A new sound emerged from the darkness, a scratching noise that seemed to be coming closer. Sarah's breath quickened as she felt a cold presence near her. She could sense something evil, something hungry, watching her from the shadows. Her hands fumbled for her phone, but it was useless. The battery was dead. She was completely alone, a terrified prey in a world of darkness. The scratching grew louder, and then there was a soft thud against the window. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what it was. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at her from the other side of the glass. The creature's face was distorted, its mouth open in a silent scream. Panic surged through her as she tried to crawl away, but her legs were like jelly. The creature's breath fogged the glass, and she could feel its hot, rancid breath on her skin. With a final, desperate effort, Sarah managed to scramble to her feet and stumble towards the front of the train. She had to find help, to escape this nightmare. The carriage was empty, save for the grotesque figure that had appeared outside the window. It was closer now, its elongated fingers pressed against the glass. Sarah could see its razor-sharp teeth, its inhuman eyes filled with a hunger that chilled her to the bone. She reached the front of the train, but the doors were locked. Trapped, there was nowhere to go. The creature's face was inches from the glass. Its eyes burned with a malevolent intensity. Sarah screamed, a sound that was lost in the howling wind. Then, darkness. The train screeched to a halt, the emergency brakes biting into the tracks. The lights flickered back on, revealing a shattered window and a gaping hole in the side of the carriage. The passengers stumbled out into the cold night air, their faces pale with shock. The train was derailed, lying on its side in a field. But Sarah was gone. Days later, search parties combed the wreckage, but there was no sign of her. The only clue to her disappearance was a single, blood-stained seat in a shattered window that looked like it had been clawed open from the inside. Some said she had been swept away by the floodwaters, others that she had simply vanished into thin air. But those who had been on the train that night knew the truth. They knew that Sarah had been taken by something evil, something that lurked in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. And as the train disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the night, They couldn't help but wonder if it was still out there, searching for new prey.